Hey folks, in case you haven't had the chance to chat with me before, I'm Amy Wooten and I'm the product manager for Operations Hub. I'm joined today also with Rohan, who's one of the TPMs for Operations Hub. So we're going to give you a little bit of an update for Ops Hub, Operations Hub. We just had our 2025 release, and we're also going to show you some exciting work that Rohan has done with select customers and looking how they can sort of reimagine their screens inside Operations Hub. All right, so just mentioning here, safe harbor disclaimer. Okay, so again, if you're sort of new to Operations Hub, the big idea is that we have a great many number of customers at GE Vernova, and often they have multiple products that they have to interact with on a day-to-day basis, right? Obviously here we're talking about SCADAs, iFix and Simplicity. We've also talked about Historian. Sometimes they have, plant apps as well, Proficy plant applications, batch, right? But they also have third-party sources, right? Sometimes they are using, third-party historians, or they have to integrate with other systems. And often they're looking for a way to quickly and easily build screens for plant operations without having to sort of know where each piece of data is coming from. They just want to have it displayed on the screen, custom built for whatever user is interacting with it. And that can be someone who is a plant manager who's very interested in, their site production, all the way to maybe an operator on the plant floor who's monitoring abnormal conditions. So that's really where Operations Hub comes into play, right? You can see our tagline here. We are a centralized environment to rapidly build industrial applications. So we basically want to be that single interface, that single pane of glass that you go to create these different UIs, these different applications for your users. And to do that, right, we have a couple of different building blocks, if you will. We have mechanisms for connecting to data, whether that's OPC UA, MQTT, SQL, REST, or GraphQL. We have a wide variety of visualizations that come out of the box, or you can create your own. And we have a screen building area where you're basically dragging and dropping your widgets and binding them to data and often layering in interactions. So that's sort of the gist of Operations Hub. And today I'm just going to be walking you through some of the recent developments in 2025. Okay, I'm not going to go through this in any detail, but I did just want to mention that we are a relatively younger product, right? I think our first release was actually in 2019. Since that initial release, we have been adding every year to our data connectivity capabilities, right? You can sort of see, as we pile on here. We've also been building in additional visualizations. There are different kinds of widgets that you will see in Operations Hub, some for display, some for user inputs. And another big thing that we've been working on is user experience. This is something that we've received a lot of feedback on. And so every release, we're trying to do some work to improve how users interact with Operations Hub and how they build screens. So you're going to see a continuation of that in Operations Hub 2025, because that's sort of some of the main themes that we have. All right. So for 2025, we had a couple of features. Probably the biggest feature we had was scripting, and this is really around making Operations Hub more extensible. So this provided a way for users to inject custom logic, especially when they're building screens and they need to do some processing of the data before or after it's displayed, if they need to do some calculations or formatting or whatnot. In the HMI space, again, we took a hard look at how do users interact with data when they're in Operations Hub. And one of the things that we've tried to do is to make that experience a little closer to what you could expect in iFix and Simplicity. So instead of having to deal with something called queries in the background, which is sort of under the covers how Operations Hub gets data, we try to make the experience more tag and asset data forward. So you're coming in to your widget and you're selecting tags for that widget, or you're selecting asset properties for that widget. In the MES space, we introduced another data connector. This is called a GraphQL connector. It doesn't have to be used for MES. It's just that the plant applications team specifically helped us building this out because they are introducing a new plant applications GraphQL API, but it is a generic connector that can be used for any GraphQL source. So again, trying to open up the different sources that Operations Hub can reach into so that you can build these really rich displays that sort of bring all your data together in one place. And then finally, there's a couple of other areas that we've worked on. I'll mention trending, another area that we work on. Pretty much every release, we're always enhancing our trending. It's one of our oldest widgets. And also, we've done a number of enhancements around helping folks find what they need to within Operations Hub, being able to copy between pages in case you want to reuse artifacts, and also modernizing our tech stack. Okay, so I'll just go into these, pretty quickly. For the simplified data binding, again, we've sort of received feedback around, hey, the query system is great as far as it gives you the ability to specify exactly what you want and the source that you're going to and all the arguments, that you might need. But especially for customers that are only interested really in iFix simplicity historian data, um, it's really a bit overkill to have to craft a query every time you want to get data from our own GE Vernova sources, right? So we have now sort of relooked at this experience. So when you come into Operations Hub, this is the page builder UI, by the way. If you have, say, a chart selected, you can come in here and browse. For that chart, you can click on the different tags. Click on the different tags that you want to see, and then you have some data retrieval settings, including start time and time duration, all that good stuff. So really sort of trying to give you that experience that you have come to expect if you work a lot with iFix and simplicity. For scripting, I'll mention we now have support for client-side scripting. We are supporting Python as the language. And the idea here is that you can create a library of scripts. You can kind of see here, there's a list of scripts that have already been created. You can define the inputs to the script. You can define the outputs of the script. And then, of course, you can create the logic that will transform the inputs into the outputs. So in the past, we were sort of constrained by what underlying APIs would let us access, right? So if you had a REST API and it allowed for sorting, then great, we can return data in a sorted order. But if the REST API didn't allow for sorting, then too bad, so sad, you would return your data set without sorting. Putting in this scripting means that you can now do things like select portions of your data set, go through each item and do some calculations on them, searching, sorting, and filtering, like I mentioned, intensive calculations, and also even just displaying them for pretty print as well. So this really just gives you an ability to inject your custom logic before using the data inside an Operations Hub screen. All right, moving on, GraphQL connector. As I mentioned, this is another way to get data into Operations Hub. So we have OPC UA, REST, SQL, MQTT, and now the GraphQL connector. The big idea here is that GraphQL has a property that is called mutability, and it lets you sort of determine how you want the response to look. All right. So you can pick sort of the pieces of data that you're interested in versus not interested in. And it's also quite type-based. So instead of having to remember all the individual APIs for interacting with your data and remember what the inputs are. You're able to, instead to browse that GraphQL source and to pick sort of the pieces of data that you're interested in. And it gives you sort of a tailored data display based on that. So again, our main driver for this one was to support plant applications. Obviously, Operations Hub is very concerned with ensuring that we are the best at connecting to our own GE Vernova sources. And so we want to ensure that we supported plant applications, but it is a generic connector. So if you have other sources, other GraphQL sources of data, you can go ahead and use it for those sources as well. All right, and last here, I'll just mention that the team has done quite a bit of work on improving our performance. For this pass specifically, they were more focused on HMI type use cases. So we looked at some of the most commonly used widgets when building an HMI. This includes the graphics, right? We have these sort of SVG graphics that you can animate with color, with data, and also value displays. So very common to use in great quantities when you're building HMI screens. So you can, I won't go through the results individually, but I'll mention that there have been sort of massive reductions in some of those page load times and some of those update rate times, right? You can see some of the areas before where we were overloaded, right? We've now brought that retrieval down to a more manageable timing. So I think that I just want to leave you with the impression that, being able to support making process graphics and HMI type screens is definitely one of our use cases and something that we'll continue to invest in as a product going forward. Okay, and finally, before I turn it over to Rohan, I'll just say there are many ways to get started with Operations Hub. Probably the easiest way, if you are a historian, a GE historian, GE Vernova historian customer, then use Operations Hub trending, right? It already comes with historian, and you can go ahead and pull up the screen and do all sorts of historical analysis looking at that data from historian. You can use the same trend tool to look at live data coming in from iFix and Simplicity as well. Another way you can get started with Operations Hub, if you have web space, you can go ahead and sort of pull your iFix and Simplicity screens into Operations Hub and have them hosted in Operations Hub apps. So sometimes folks want to have, say, an iPad app, and they want to have, one of the HMI screens sort of embedded in that app. You can do that with Operations Hub in conjunction with the web space widget. If you are making new screens, particularly new screens on top of your HMIs. So we see this in the case of like centralized visualization, right? Or we've seen people have like a centralized command center. You can create different overview type screens that will sort of tie together your existing HMIs and give you a way to sort of have an overview of how things are going before they drill into the details of the particular SCADA screen. I'll mention here, with these new screens, you can build them with Operations Hub widgets on top of iFix, Simplicity and Data, Simplicity and Historian data. You can, of course, use that web space widget, but you can also augment those screens with other data coming from SQL or coming from REST. So you really can sort of make those screens that have data come from a number of different sources and displayed just in a single view. And then finally, I think this is probably what most folks think about when they hear getting started with Operations Hub. So if you already have your HMI screens and you look for opportunities if you are planning to redesign them. So, for example, you're going to talk to Joe in a bit, and he's going to tell you a bit about some considerations for designs when building HMI screens. If you are looking to redesign your existing screens, consider using Operations Hub, right? It gives you a natural point where you might want to consider using a different technology. So hopefully these are some options you can think about. You don't have to make a full immediate switch from, having all thick clients and then suddenly moving over to Operations Hub. You can sort of find these little opportunities to start exploring newer HTML5 technology for your visualization needs and get started.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video insightful, click here to watch the next video and learn how GE Vernova is at the forefront of tackling challenges in the water and wastewater industry.